How's it going? I'm going to do this video a little bit more off the cuff, so it's not scripted. I'm going to try to loosen up a little bit. So let me talk about psychedelic drugs for a little bit. My thoughts. So there's been research in the past decade or so concerning psychedelics. It's sort of been a revival or renaissance of interest in the psychological community concerning psychedelic drugs. Specifically, psilocybin, which is the active component of what people call magic mushrooms. Also, ketamine, which has traditionally been used as an anesthetic. They used to use it, I guess, for when people were undergoing surgery, but eventually they switched to other things that had less of a psychedelic property to it. So specifically, what is interesting is they've found that concerning psilocybin, it seems to be really effective at helping certain psychological conditions, such as addiction. There's some research on people who are trying to quit smoking, who after having a psychedelic experience with psilocybin have had much success for stopping using cigarettes. I think it was like maybe a 75% success rate versus, this is, really good compared to some of the other options available for people with addiction problems. Other interesting things to note is with psilocybin, people with PTSD, there's some evidence suggesting that psilocybin can be helpful with people who have experienced some sort of trauma and they are reliving the trauma in their mind, and it's causing them torment and perhaps impairing, I guess the definition would include that it's impairing their daily functioning. So they found psilocybin, in PTSD, people have a tendency to distance themselves from the trauma psychologically because the trauma is being thrust into their consciousness without them wanting it to, and it's happening over and over again. So when you hide, I guess from a psychological point of view, when you hide from something that you fear, it becomes stronger. So the idea is to try to face your fear, because then it diminishes and it's more easily, you can define it more easily if you are facing it. If you're not facing it, it's this abstract, large thing. One thing that psilocybin seems to be really good at is helping people come to terms with what they fear, I guess it kind of thrusts people into a state of mind where they are forced to evaluate what they're afraid of, and from all different angles and from every possible point of view. And you would think, intuitively, you might think that would be negative, but it actually seems to be very helpful, because then a full realization occurs for the person about their fear, and I guess it becomes much smaller because they clearly define it in their mind, and it's no longer this large abstract fear, but it's just a small defined thing that they can then deal with. And I guess the psychedelic experience is very helpful in that, in leading people to that, through that process. Also, more recently, there's been research concerning psilocybin and clinical depression, or specifically treatment-resistant depression. What happens is, in a clinical setting, they usually, let's say a comfy room with like sort of dim lighting and sort of made to feel homey and comfortable. A nice comfy chair. People are put in this space, and they are ahead of time, before they're explained that they need to just accept the process of the experience. They need to let it take them where it's going to take them, and not to fight it. That's important. And then also the clinicians explain to the subjects that they'll be there for them should they need anything, and if they are experiencing fear, that they'll be right there, and they'll attend to their needs. So that a space is created where they feel comfortable, and they can have the psychedelic experience, and it can be positive. And what they've found is that it appears to have a strong antidepressant effect that seems to last at least 6 months for a lot of the subjects, where they, after coming out of this experience, they sort of have a new perspective on life. I guess one of the things with depression is when the mind gets stuck in a rut, and you're going through your daily grind or whatever, and everything feels so familiar. It feels so dull and lifeless, and you have no motivation. But you're stuck in this rut. And I guess psychedelics are very useful at getting people out of a rut, because you begin to view your life in radically new ways, and take stock of things in a different sort of way. And so this is very helpful. The other thing is, there's some research going on with ketamine that is pretty exciting. So just in a similar sort of way, people are being treated with ketamine, and they are having not so much, I would say maybe it's more of a mild psychedelic experience than psilocybin, but people are seeing immediate like relief from really, really dark, deep depression, just from a small dose of ketamine. And what seems to be really useful with ketamine is people who have gotten to a state of where they're having suicidal ideations, and maybe they've even attempted suicide. People that are in that place and can't seem to escape. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. Well, ketamine, for whatever reason, can lift people very rapidly and efficiently out of that dark place where they're no longer contemplating suicide. I mean, we're talking about within a day, or half a day. They're at a brighter place where they're no longer, considering suicide. So this is really helpful for, getting people to up a little bit to a more stable ground, so that then more conventional therapies can take hold and be more effective. Getting people away from the idea of suicide, is really necessary before people would be even willing to go through other, more traditional treatments. So that's something that's really helpful about ketamine. Another thing that I've come across recently that's interesting to me is some research on the minds of like infants and toddlers, the way that the brains of like small children, these young children, seem to work is very similar to the psychedelic experience. Also, there was a strong similarity to dreaming in the brains of children, and having a dream and what is happening in the brain at that time. So this is interesting because you think about when you were a child, and the way, if you can remember back that far, and the way that life seemed like a dream, but it was exciting and everything was fresh, and it was, really, it was just so compelling. And as an adult, I think most people experience the feeling of wishing sometimes that you could be a kid again, and experiencing that excitement and that, that just incredible view on the world. Because, I guess as a child, life sort of felt like a dream, but we didn't realize that, and we don't realize that until we become adults. So it's interesting that there are drugs that can perhaps provide people the experience of feeling like a child again. All that being said, there's obviously a lot of downsides to psychedelics, such as, obviously you can have really bad experiences, bad trips, and you can sometimes even have persistent psychosis. I'm not advocating that people go out and try psychedelics. Obviously they aren't legal. I feel like maybe eventually they will be, but for that reason, but also unless you are a very responsible and wise individual, you're very likely to get yourself into a lot of psychological or even physical trouble using psychedelics. But it's really cool to think that perhaps someday it will be common for someone, if they're feeling a little down, if they're stuck in a rut, instead of taking an SSRI and having to wait 6 weeks to feel any better, you can just go spend an afternoon at the doctor's office and have a psychedelic experience, and bam, you're set, you're in a better place for maybe 6 months to a year. That's a really cool thought. So I think that we can find a place for these drugs in society in a responsible way. definitely in a legal way, if the legal status changes eventually. But I do feel positive that there are some useful, some good uses for some of these psychedelic drugs. So that's my thoughts on psychedelics. Let me know what you think. Please subscribe and give me a thumbs up.